Hello and welcome to Israel 365 News. This is Pastor Trey Graham joining you from the great state of Texas, and it's time to talk about what's going on in the Holy Land right now, specifically on the most important piece of real estate in the world called the Temple Mount. Dr. Jane Kronfeld joins us on the telephone from the land of Israel. Never been on our program before. Tell the audience a little bit about your personal story, and then we're going to jump into the Temple Mount.
My name is Dr. Jane Kronfeld. I grew up in Manhattan on the Upper East Side of New York. For those of your listeners who have been there, I spent my entire life living in New York, save a few years in D.C. doing my undergraduate work. I came back to New York where I got 2 master's degrees, a PhD. I taught for a while, and then I moved into the philanthropic space, managing high net worth and ultra high net worth family foundations and their philanthropic investments, which was really an incredible experience and opened a range of opportunities for me, which led me really into the social movement and activist space. I work in philanthropy, and my capacity for organization, I'm a bit detail-oriented of a person, gave me a really incredible opportunity to serve at the forefront of some really important social movements, chief among them, which is probably of interest to your audience, is human trafficking and modern-day slavery. And I worked in that space for about 10 years at the international level. And that taught me a lot about how you can develop and create a social movement that can fundamentally change the world. My father passed away about 10 years ago. Life dramatically changes when a parent passes away. And 5 years ago, I decided, having also been working in the Jewish space and as a Jewish activist, that the rising anti-Semitism in the United States was unbearable to me. Of course, at the time, a lot of people said, "Oh, you're crazy. It's not that bad." And this was, about 5 years ago. And I said, "No, it's really bad and it's getting worse." And I, to be totally honest, I was very fearful about the trajectory of America for the Jewish community. And really after the shooting it was in Pennsylvania, where at the time my dissertation advisor for my PhD, that was his shul, his synagogue, for his daughter, who's also named Melissa, had been bat mitzvahed. That to me was a real wake-up call that, that it was time to return home. It was time to return to the land of Israel now. I'm not saying that anyone's going to be building train tracks across America, but for me, that was a fundamental awakening that, it was not, unfortunately, it was not going to be safe to be Jewish in America in the coming years. And I think the past 5 years has taught us as such. These issues don't correct themselves. They often require awful things to happen before they are corrected. And I didn't want to wait around and see that. And so I quite literally packed up my bags. And at the time, my 2 dogs, I have 3 now, but I quite literally packed up my bags, got on a plane and arrived in Israel. And jokingly asked for political asylum and was told, no, just go make Aliyah. And I made Aliyah from inside the country, which if your audience isn't familiar with the term, it means basically going back to Israel, ascending to Israel is the literal term. And I made Aliyah from inside this country, becoming an Israeli citizen over the course of that my first year there. Because I was very fortunate to have my own company and work, like I said, in social movements and philanthropy, basically my work at the time was helping high net worth families, organizations, nonprofits, initiatives, governments. And so I was very fortunate. I had the capacity to kind of do what I want and work when I want and pick and choose my clients. And in the course of that happening, I guess sometime around my second year is when I met a mutual friend of ours, the esteemed Rabbi Yehuda Glick. And as I mentioned to you, your wife, when you were here in Israel, I'd always been a huge fan of Rabbi Glick. I like to say I'm the chief cheerleader of the Glick clique. And when I had the opportunity to meet him, I went right up to him and I told him what I did and who I was. And I said, if there was ever an opportunity to help you, I would love to. And, I do that quite a bit with the people whose projects and work I'm very passionate about. And not everybody calls. And much to my great, amazement and pleasure, Rabbi Glick did call me in the coming days and asked to meet with me and asked me to help him with his new project, which is called the Shalom Jerusalem Foundation. And he fights for equal rights on the Temple Mount, much like the organization I work on now does. And that was really my kind of opening to the Temple Mount. I was working with him for about a month, and he said to me, "Would you like to go to the Mount?" And I said to him, I didn't know that I could go. What do I do? Do I need a ticket? Do I need to buy something? Do I need a special pass? Like, how do I get up there? When do I go? What do I wear? How do I prepare? And he told me everything I needed to know. And the very next morning, he took me up. And for those in your audience who know Rabbi Glick, he is bigger than life. So to ascend to the Temple Mount on your first trip with someone like Rabbi Glick was, I still remember it to this day, as if it was a dreamscape. It was the most crazy, inspiring, terrifying, uplifting, spiritual, and also disheartening experience of my life, because it was there that I saw the real apartheid that exists in the Jewish state, and that is the apartheid that the Jews confront each and every single day, whether it's restrictions on the Mount or restrictions in Judea and Samaria or restrictions in Hebron. And up until that point, I'd always wondered, why does Rabbi Glick go to the Temple Mount every day? Like, it's kind of weird. Like, what is he doing up there? Just walking around and praying? Like, that's so strange. And the moment I set foot on that complex, it was no longer strange to me, and it became my life too. And I like to say, Rabbi Glick kind of basically took me up there almost 3 years ago now, and I never left. And that, I guess, brings you to how you and I met.
Indeed it does. My guest right now on Smart Talk is Dr. Melissa Kronfeld. She's joining us on the telephone from Israel, and she mentioned a friend and a guest on our program previously many times, Rabbi Yehuda Glick. He's been a speaker here in our church as well in Melissa, Texas. And so my wife and I were in Israel just a week or so ago, and another mutual friend of ours, Yishai Fleischer, who's been a guest on this program and a guest in our church, introduced us to Dr. Kronfeld to learn about the interesting work she's doing with an organization called On The Har. Har is the Hebrew word for mount or mountain. So you took the visit with my friend Yehuda Glick, and it's now turned into your life passion. And so let's do a little Bible. Let's do a little history. Why is this piece of real estate so important to Jews and to Christians?
Sure, and I thank you for that question, because so often people start with the establishment of the Beit HaMikdash, the first one, the second one. Sometimes people start with the state of Israel. Sometimes people start with Jesus. Sometimes people even start, most sadly, in 1967 war. The fact of the matter is that the Temple Mount is the rock of conception, is where Jews and many Christians believe that the dirt that God picked up and created the earth with and created man with comes from underneath that rock. It is there that Adam and Eve made the first sacrifice after their fall into sin, begging God for forgiveness. It is there that Noah built his altar. It is where Isaac prayed mincha after his binding by his father. It is where Cain and Abel had the first murder occurred in human history. And it is the essence of who we are as human beings. The entire story of creation, of humanity, of Judaism, and all that follows from it, including Christianity and Islam, comes from this place. There is an unbroken chain from the moment God created the universe through to today of the Jewish connection and the godly connection to the Temple Mount. And so it's very important for people to understand that. Of course, as we move through time, we built the Jews upon conquering Canaan, made their way down the Mishkan, down all the way to Jerusalem, and eventually took the city of Jerusalem and built the first temple there, which stood for a while and then was sacked for a while, and they came back. A guy's prophecy from God, how can you sit in your houses and not build my house? I wish to dwell amongst you. And so we were fortunate enough that him and his crew, and along with Ezra the scribe, came along, and they got that second one built, and it was up for a while. And then, unfortunately, as the story goes, as most of your audience knows, it was sacked a second time. And after the second temple was destroyed, it basically has never been rebuilt since. Of course, there have been attempts. There has been Jews living in and around the area forever. There has been the yearning and the longing for it. But as of today, the third temple has never been built. And that is really I feel both very sad about that, because I would love to fulfill those mitzvot to God. But at the same time, what a blessing it is that it hasn't been rebuilt yet. And people think I'm crazy when I say that, but what a blessing it is, because that means we're the generation we've been waiting for. We're the ones that are going to get to fulfill the greatest mitzvah, the most important thing that God wants from us, which is to create a home, a house where he can dwell amongst us and bring his divine presence back to us, and be here in our earthly presence. And God willing, that will be a big part of curing the many ills that we are confronting and facing in the world today.
My guest today is Dr. Melissa Kronfeld. She is the director and co-founder of On The Har, an organization emphasizing the importance of Temple Mount. And she just gave a moment ago a bit of a history lesson and a Bible lesson of why this piece of territory in Jerusalem is so important, where King Solomon built the first temple, and then Ezra and Nehemiah, Zerubbabel built the second temple. It was later expanded by the king known as King Herod during the years right before the earthly life of Jesus. This is the temple that Jesus visited. It's called the Second Temple, which was sadly destroyed, really as Jesus prophesied would happen, in the year 70 A.D., just 40 years after the earthly life of Jesus. And so now, since then, Jews and Christians around the world have longed for this holy site to be holy to the God of the Bible again. And yet on that very spot right now, or nearby the spot, depending on whose argument you listen to, is a Muslim shrine. Famous photograph of Jerusalem shows the Golden Dome, this thing called the Dome of the Rock. What is that doing there right now?
In that great movie, Usual Suspects, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled, that great line at the end. Well, the greatest trick that the Muslims and the Arabs ever pulled was convincing everyone that Al-Aqsa Mosque is the Golden Dome. And they're so good at it that I will tell you honestly, even many religious Jews don't realize that is not Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Golden Dome is not Al-Aqsa Mosque. Al-Aqsa Mosque is on the compound. It is directly, when you walk out onto the compound, it is directly to your right. But it is a far way removed from the actual Golden Dome. But the Golden Dome, or the Golden Kippah, as we like to joke in the Jewish community, is the covering over the Rock of Conception. And there's a very interesting, piece of historical knowledge that a lot of people don't know, but it was actually the conquering Arab Empire had actually constructed that complex, that gold dome and that building in honor of the Jews who had fought alongside them to hold back the Byzantines and the Persians. Now some people may look at that and see all the Islamic writing on it and the Islamic art, the Islamic style art, I should say. But if you've ever been to Hebron, and you see the tombs of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, or as Yishai Fleischer says, the mamas and the papas, it looks the same way. And that is because for most of Jewish history after Christ, we have lived under Islamic rule. And so there's a lot of the Jewish spaces, historical Jewish spaces that still stand, may look today to people like they are Islamic places. But in fact, there is good historical evidence in ancient records that they built that as a covering to protect the rock, to honor the Jews. Now, does that mean they were going to give it back to them, that they were going to recognize their right to worship there, that they were, going to hand it over to them? Absolutely not. But that is why that is there. It's a beautiful building. I walk around it all day long. No one would deny the beauty of that place. I wouldn't spend all my time up there and stare at it and take pictures in front of it if I didn't think such. But the unfortunate reality is that the plan, the Bible, the Torah, it's very clear what has to happen. The next step is we have to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, and that will require the removal of the Golden Dome. I am not one of those radical, rabid, revolutionary Jews that says let's tear it down and blow it up. No, often in life we move buildings, right? We move historical pieces of history. We keep them in museums and we preserve them for all time. But at some point, the Golden Dome is going to have to be moved, whether carefully or not, and preserved elsewhere or not. And the Beit HaMikdash will be built in its place. Hopefully then we'll have the opportunity to do some real archaeology on that complex. And, God willing, I am a firm believer that the Ark of the Covenant and the rest of the vessels are probably buried deep below the surface of the complex. If we can believe in miracles, we believe in the stories of the Torah and the Bible, and we believe in all of these miraculous and magical and incredible things, I don't think it's so far-fetched to also believe that the Jews at that time, with the help of God, were able to dig holes or dig caverns so deep that they were able to secure, preserve, and save the most important temple vessels beneath that complex. And so I really believe that not only will we be the generation that lays the first foundation stone, but in so doing, I fully believe that God will reveal back to us the Ark of the Covenant, the tablets, and at least some of the remaining vessels so that we can begin sacrifice. But, it's important for your listening audience to understand that by building the Mizbeach, the altar upon which the sacrifices are done, that's actually not, I wouldn't say more important, but by being able to build a Mizbeach and having offerings, the temple is technically open. The temple can be a house of worship. It can be fully operational. The sanctuary, Yazarah, the rest of those pieces, that is, of course, where God will dwell and our vessels will be. But if we could just take kind of that first step and at least maybe get an altar up there, we're already going to be 3/4 of the way towards our goal. So I'm very confident and very positive because I'm up there every day. And I can tell you, even when we go up with Rabbi Glick now, we go up with him frequently, when he tells us stories of even 5, 10, 15 years ago of how they were treated up there. And now we're taking groups of 40, 50 religious Jews and doing 3 full minyans a day, which any of your listening audience is welcome to join us. We do it at 7, 9:30 and 12:30 in the winter, 1:30 in the summer. But prayer is happening on Temple Mount. And if the people in the news media or your friends or family or other Jews are telling you that that's ridiculous, that's crazy, prayer doesn't happen on the Temple Mount, they are wrong. Prayer is happening every single day on the Temple Mount. We are worshiping. We are doing certain acts that we would be doing in the temple if it was built. And to me, that is a clear and obvious, revelation that we're literally this close. And your audience can't see what I'm doing with my hands, but imagine my forefinger and my thumb almost touching each other. We are this close, Pastor, in finalizing what God wants us to do here on earth for him.
So my wife and I were with you and Rabbi Levy just a week or so ago, a beautiful time and learning and studying together and walking along on the Temple Mount. So tell our Christian audience why this should be and will be important to them.
For your Christians, well, because we all believe that God's presence should dwell on this earth. And most importantly, what I think what is lost on a lot of people is that the Temple Mount is a house of prayer for all people. It is very clear, and there's never been a time in history where it has been, simply a place for the Jews. Everyone is welcome on the Temple Mount. That is why there has always been the court of the Gentiles. There's the women's court. There's a place for everybody on the Temple Mount. But what is most important to know is that as long as the Arabs and the Muslims and Jordan and King Abdullah specifically and the Waqf most notoriously, the Waqf being the Jordanian administration that quote unquote oversees the sanctity of the Mount. And by that I mean they play soccer, fly kites, eat food and leave their garbage about. But what is important to remember is that as long as the Arabs and Muslims control the Temple Mount, neither you or me or our Buddhist friends or even our just simply spiritual friends or even our atheist friends that, want to, pray to a deity of universalism, they cannot do that there. So the most important thing, this is a human rights struggle. This is a civil rights struggle. This is about freedom of worship and freedom of movement. And the only people in the world who will ensure that this is a house of prayer for all people, no matter what that prayer is, no matter what God you pray to, is if Jewish sovereignty can be reasserted on the Temple Mount. The Beit HaMikdash will come, the temple will come, the divine presence will come, but what matters most important now is securing equal rights and access And that can only be done when the Jews take that first step to reassert control over it. I mean, in what world can you imagine another country, a tiny, obscure, unimportant, country with no power, no military, no nothing, still living in a backwards kind of anti-woman monarchy? In what world can we imagine that they control, a couple of square miles of land in the capital city of another country, an ancient country?
You're talking about the kingdom of Jordan at that time.
Exactly.
Just to explain.
And it's, I mean, it'd be like if, Wyoming controlled Melissa, Texas. I mean, what? No, Texas would never stand for that. Don't tread on me. And I think, the Jews could have a lot to learn from our friends, brothers and sisters down in Texas, where my best friend also lives. Shout out to Mary Beth Minutes. But, you guys wouldn't tolerate Wyoming coming in and owning and running and dictating the rules in Melissa, Texas. So why on earth do we live in a world where the Jews allow Jordan, the king of Jordan, after all the horror his country has committed against the Jewish people and in the region and against his own people, to control the most important part of our capital, where 2 synagogues has stood and where a third one will stand again? I mean, it's busha, it's an outrage, it's a shanda, it's, I could use a thousand words, or, my grandmother was, it's a shanda, So, to me, there's legal issues, there's political issues, there's social issues, there's human rights issues, there's religious issues. And we don't need to segment them. But when we talk about this, when we talk about it as a human rights struggle, as a civil rights struggle, as the reassertion of sovereignty in our own country, especially for people who may not believe the way you and they do, it becomes an issue that should be universal for all people. Because at the end of the day, so many people admire the great Dr. Martin Luther King and the work that he did. And the struggle that we're confronting up there is exactly the same. There are places I can't go. There are water fountains I can't drink from. There's times and days that I am not permitted to go. And if that seems rational to you, well, then turn the channel. This is not the show for you. But if you're sitting at home and thinking, well, that's strange, why can't the Jews go worship at their temple? Well, yeah, I agree with you. It is strange. It's awfully strange, and it's horrific, and it's an infringement upon my fundamental human rights and freedoms. And we go, and that's why we go up there each and every single day. We make sure that Jews are present on the mountain each and every single minute that we are permitted. Because if we are not there, if we don't normalize our presence there, it's not going to be normal for us to be there. And if we don't bear witness to what is happening and be physically present to the atrocities that are happening up there, then it's going to be taken from us once again. And I refuse to be a part of the generation that ignores God's pleas. God is pleading with us. He's begging us. When does he do that? It's usually us begging him, right? God is begging us. We can hear the footsteps of Mashiach. The time is now. And it's not going to take a lot to get it done. We need to believe, and then we need to act. And if there's anyone, who I know can agree with me on that, it's probably you, Pastor.
Well, I will say amen and amen. And you're being a great guest today. We appreciate your time. My guest has been Dr. Melissa J. Kronfeld. You need to visit their website, HighOnTheHar.com. HighOnTheHar. HighOnTheHar.com. Find out about their work, learn what they're doing to stand for religious rights, worship rights, human rights, and the holiest site in the world, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Melissa, thank you for your time. We look forward to speaking with you again. Blessings to you.
Thank you so much for having me. And to everyone listening out there, if you are coming to Israel, we have tours available every Sunday through Thursday in the morning and the afternoon. Our tours are completely free of charge, and we would welcome all of you to join us in our movement in the fight for equal rights and access to the Temple Mount. You just visit the website, the forum, let us know when you're coming, book your day and time, and we'll meet you at the gate and take you up for the most incredible experience of your life.
That's HighOnTheHar.com. Thank you again. Blessings. Our guest on this program has been Dr. Melissa Kronfeld with High on the Har. Visit their website, HighOnTheHar.com. This is Pastor Trey Graham joining you from Texas for Israel 365 News.